Okay. Hey, everybody. This is Mary Camacho. I'm doing the Holo launch brief today. So welcome to Holo's launch brief. This is our somewhat new short format live stream. We're doing it every couple of weeks. Well, 3 to 4 weeks, actually, I think is about how it's coming out. And it's the intention is just to keep everyone apprised of how the work's going as we drive towards our launch of the Holo network. So today I'm going to have Alistair Ong joining me. Alistair's been working as a product development director here at Holo for, well, most of the last 5 years, right, Alistair?
6 year anniversary, actually.
Okay, there we go. Well, happy 6 year anniversary. Um,
Thank you.
all right, so let me just kind of give some little quick kind of intro to this thing. So in our launch briefs, what we're doing is we're basically going to do an introduction. That's this part here. And then I'm going to give a short update about the work, what's been accomplished, what we're currently working on, and what's coming next. I'm going to pay some special attention to things that have maybe been a challenge or that have had an impact to our launch timeline. And then we'll answer questions. And first, we'll deal with any carryover questions from the last brief or things that came in the middle. And then we'll take some live questions today from participants in the call. And the way that works is we're going to answer whatever we can here. We'll read all the questions. We'll let you know if we can answer them, if we can't answer them, or if some other group or whatever different groups should be taking those questions and answering them. So after that, we'll wrap up, and the whole thing takes about 15 to 25 minutes, depending on how long we talk. All right, so let's kick into the update. It's been 3, maybe 4 weeks since the last brief. I know it was last month in May. We've accomplished quite a bit since then. So I'll just kind of talk through some of those things. I know we're going to be putting up something on the screen. My words won't necessarily go exactly following through everything on there, but some highlights are really that the key manager extension, which I talked about last time, has had a security review. That went really well. This is Holo work. So this is a key manager extension for Holo, and it was built by the Holo team. And we actually had a Holochain core team member do the review. And the results of that will be published soon. We're just finishing up some of it. I don't know if every bit of it can be done. Maybe Alistair, do you know if all the changes were done based on the review?
Almost all have been done, all will be done. We're just cleaning up a few last tests, and then as I think and then some non-security related UX cleanup, just so that we're code complete and we're ready to go back into review.
Yep, great. So the way that works in an audit or a review is that the reviewer basically goes through all the code, goes through everything, and gives a report, writes up an initial report. That report is then walked through with the developers. The developers will make any changes based on the recommendations that came in on the security review. And then once they're complete, all the changes are then re-reviewed by the same person or group of people that did the initial review. So that is going great. And then after all of that, there's still a process, because this is an extension. What we mean by that, it's a browser extension. And so it's going to have to be go into all of the various browsers that we're going to be supporting. So make sure that it's available, downloadable, and that it's accepted into the extension stores. I think that's what it's called. So if I'm saying it wrong, jump in and, tell me I'm doing okay. Good. Alistair gives me a thumbs up on that one. He's been coordinating a lot of the work on that. So another thing that we've been doing, and this one has been a little bit bigger than we thought, was we've been working to upgrade all of the infrastructure and the applications. So Holo, the platform, is made up of a lot of centralized infrastructure plus all of the decentralized or distributed Holochain applications. And we've had to bump everything up to function with the latest version of Holochain. So there's a question later that we're going to talk about Holochain versions. But when this happens, basically what we're doing is we're getting base level functionality in Holochain that is required for Holo's launch. This upgrade was a bit of a challenge. We haven't upgraded since version 0.2, and we were doing a bump up to 0.4. The effort was pretty involved in terms of our team. A lot of the people on the team were helping to do some of this work. And it's taken us a little bit longer than we estimated. So this, this ate up a little bit of our time, but we're still on track for Q3 right now. But we just don't have a lot of extra room for the unexpected. So as we sprint kind of through the summer into our launch. And so that's where we are with that. We've still got a day or two left on finalizing bits and pieces of that. We've been doing testing to make sure it works. Everything is upgraded. It's just a matter of fine-tuning things as we try to deploy it into the different environments. Okay. The next thing, we've been continued to make progress on recommendations for the audits that have been done. These are the other audits. These are the external audits, the Holofuel application audit and the Holofuel reserve. And we've actually completed all the work on Holofuel at this point, but we're still waiting for some of the things to be done for the Holofuel reserve. And then we're going to hand all of that back to the external audit team and have them do their final review on that. So that's really good. The components team, that's the group that's in Holochain, but working on other ecosystem kind of infrastructure and applications. They've been making a lot of great progress on the Holochain launcher. And the Holochain launcher is actually a launch dependency for Holo, because one of the things that we require is that applications be workable both in a local context, which means people can install them locally and run them, or they can have them be hosted so that they're web browser accessible. And the same exact version of the application has to be able to allow people to work across those networks, across that network in those two different contexts. So it's really important that the Holochain launcher function and support Holofuel and other applications in advance of our Holo launch. So that's moving ahead. That's continuing right now. Looking ahead, let's see, other than a lot of testing and a lot of optimization, which is coming, and I'll get into more of that in our next brief, we have a few key things that are being finished. And one of those is the service log rotation. So Alistair is actually here because he can talk about a bunch of the different things that we're working on right now. And one of them is service log. So Alistair, why don't you give us a little bit of an explanation as to what service logs are and why we need to rotate them?
Yeah, sure. So I think, as some or maybe most of you will know, Holofuel is intended to be a hosting-backed currency. So for that to happen, you need to have underlying hosting, and you need high level of verification and integrity on that underlying hosting work. So Service Logger is a Holochain application that we use to actually track the underlying hosting work and reference it for Holofuel. So we use Holochain's tamper-proof capabilities to allow us to do this hosting and the verification of hosting in a distributed and decentralized way. Now, it's fairly common with logs anyway, because people will want to hold onto logs for a long time, but it's especially in the case of a Holochain application, because you can't delete anything. Eventually those logs will get too large, right? And that's why we need to be able to rotate logs. It's actually pretty standard practice for most organizations to do log rotation in some form or other, where you archive the old logs and move on to a new set of logs. Some of you may remember the elemental chat tests in the past, and one of the reasons why we wound those down after a month or so was because there were too many service logs, and we can optimize and make efficiency improvements, and we have done a lot of that. But the underlying problem of, if you never delete, then eventually you'll have too many logs, won't go away without rotation, which is why we have it now.
Yeah. And to be really explicit, the way that the logs work is that in order for, so we know that Holofuel is used to, you invoice in Holofuel, like hosts will invoice in Holofuel, and app managers will make payments on those invoices in Holofuel. the thing that is the service logs are really used for is, one is when the invoices are done, the service logs are made available to the app managers to sort of prove this is what the hosting was for. And then the secondary thing is that in order for hosts to redeem at a reserve account, the logs are required with the Holofuel that was paid to them in order to validate that they indeed received this Holofuel for providing hosting services. So there's it's an intrinsic thing in the broader Holochain system, or I'm sorry, Holo hosting system for service logs. So it's a critical aspect for us getting to launch and to having all of this working so that it can be, something that's flowing and continuing to flow and not getting stuck because somebody's, hard drive got a little full. It's not the kind of problems we want to run into. All right, so let me just take a quick look at some other things that we're working on. The other big chunk of work that we're working on, and this is a little different than working on the app, it's the Holofuel migration. And I think in the dev spaces, a lot of people have asked, hey, what happens when you upgrade a Holochain application? What's the process that you go through to upgrade Holochain applications? Because in distributed apps, if you think about it, a lot of times to do a change is to make a fork, essentially. And that's true in a Holochain application as well. But what we know is that all software eventually has to be updated, eventually has to be upgraded. You are adding new features, you're making changes. Well, a lot of those changes are relatively easy. If they're on the front end, if they're not part of what we call the integrity engine of Holochain, if they're not addressing like the key data integrity of an application, those sorts of updates can be made rather easily. But when you are making a change that's going to be at the level of the integrity of the data, then you need to have a process for doing the migration. And so this is something that we're working on right now. And a lot of it is, some of it's some development and a lot of it is in testing. And so we're just going through a lot of work to figure out and make sure that that's gonna flow seamlessly for our end users. So I'll have a lot more to say about that later after we've done more work on it. Let's see, what else? I think that's pretty much the update. I'd like to move into some of the carryover questions. And I'm going to answer a few of these, and some I'm going to throw over to Alistair to answer, and then we'll start taking questions from today's participants. So first up, what is still missing before launch will be ready? Well, a lot of testing, a lot of optimization. We're building load testing infrastructure and we're running load tests. We're also doing integration testing. But some functionality that we're still finalizing is also that I think I mentioned this in the last update as well, because we were getting ready to start it. We are in progress right now. And we're updating Holoport registrations. And this is to better secure the keys and make sure that the way that keys and seeds and keys are created is aligned with Holochain and the launcher. So we're making sure that's just enabling consistency and alignment. As I just mentioned, we're working on the migration and testing for Holofuel and the service logs. And then, there's a couple of things here and there where we're finalizing some work that is required for regulatory and compliance. And that's really just about making sure that we have approval for how all the KYC processes will go and how interacting with the Holo reserve, reserve accounts. Those are the critical areas for that. Yeah, those are the main chunks of work. I mean, there's lots of little bits and pieces, but it all comes together in integration testing. So that's a lot where we are right now. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that, Alistair?
No, I think that covers it.
All right. So let's see, what's another question here? Are the audits complete or are they still in process? Well, kind of as I described, the audits themselves, the first audits have been done for Holofuel and the Holofuel Reserve and even for the Key Manager extension. And we're working to finish all of the things that were the recommendations so that we can just have a quick re-review. There's a couple of things we're going to actually have reviewed in addition to that. We're going to have a second review by a different person of the reserve after all the changes are made prior to launch. That's going to be another internal one. We're actually having somebody from the Holochain core team who has not worked on any of this come in and take a look at it. The reason we're doing some of these multiple audits and reviews is because we think that it's great to have external folks looking at stuff. They bring a perspective and trust from the broader ecosystem that are critical. But there's also people on the Holochain team who have not been building Holochain applications, but who are extremely familiar with the technology and its implementation, and who can give an additional angle or perspective on whether or not, or like what they see as security using a Holochain application. And so we think that by combining these, we're getting an even broader and more in-depth review of the work that we're doing. So those are still, there's a couple of those are still to come. So the final steps, what are the final steps before launch is ready? So I'm going to answer that a little bit differently than like, what do we need to do and what are we working on? The final steps are really about procedure, right? We're doing development, we're doing audits and reviews, and we're doing testing. And then we're going to get to a place, a moment in time that we're going to put everything together, and we're going to put it out there, and we're going to do a process of what we're calling UAT and final acceptance testing. Now, this isn't going through and testing every single feature that's done in QA, and we've been doing testing throughout. But this is a final build, so to speak, of the entire platform, and then having groups of people that are part of our alpha testing network come in and go through and just do, yep, this is working. The base level functionality of each area, each thing that needs to do, it's all working, and leave it there for 30 days, a little longer than 30 days. And then at that point, we're sort of validating everything. Kind of in parallel, we're doing some other load testing. The team will be doing load testing on a couple of key areas of the network that are not completed, but it's not part of the same, they're not even in the same environments at that point. After we do that, we basically get to a point where we write up a report about our entire long-lived test, and we have a go, no go decision-making point. Once we make a go decision, then we go through a launch process. And that launch process involves a setup, a review of that setup, a kind of following through launching, and then we have to do some smoke testing of the configured new environment. And then there's a period of time where we have to get a lot of the holoports back onto the network. There's going to be a kind of re-registration of holoports onto the network, and then it will become available generally. So the launch is a little bit of a process and a procedure, and we'll be talking more in depth with all the people who are going to be part of the long-lived test and the UAT in the coming month or so, and then we'll be giving a lot of information out prior to the launch itself. So let's see. Why are you working on different versions of Holochain? They are confused because there was work on 02, 03, 04. Alistair, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So, so I'll put a little disclaimer that Holochain isn't monolithic like a blockchain such as Ethereum, but this question, it sounds to me like there's an assumption that we're working in multiple on multiple versions in parallel, and I think it's easier to think of this as like a network upgrade process. So for a long time, we've been on Holochain 0.2, which is a fairly old version of Holochain by now. And the reason we were on that was it provided us with a level of development stability to focus on the Holo features. But now as we get to that point, to this launch point and this testing point, then we want to be bringing in all the latest features and especially the optimizations that we're really excited about. And that's why we are doing that bump to 0.4, as I think Mary was speaking to earlier. We're not actually doing anything with 0.3.
Right. I want to say one other thing. There's it's important to understand that just like any other infrastructure or code base, there are always multiple versions. I mean, if you think about your computer, the OS, there's always multiple versions that are supported. The older versions, you stay on them because they're reliable. You know they work. You don't have to go through the headache sometimes that is an upgrade to your OS, right? Sometimes the applications don't work the same way. If you upgrade to your operating system version too soon, sometimes the apps aren't ready. And it might take a month or two for the apps to come out with a version that's ready for the latest OS. This is the same thing for us with Holochain. Holochain is sort of like the OS of the applications in a way. It's not quite that, but it's the base level infrastructure that they're built on. At some point in time, there will be Holochain applications built in multiple versions. And the Holo platform will need to support multiple versions. At launch, we're just going to be supporting the most recent version of Holochain. And so this is what we're building towards right now. And we've basically just been, as Alistair said, upgrading to the latest version, but then leaving it there for a bit of time so that we have stability to keep doing our development work. There are a few other things that Holochain is working on. There's just a couple of dependencies that we want to get in. At this point, I'm not even sure that any of them are required because we need to do work based on them, but they're things that we know that post-launch we will want. So we're already planning for our post-launch dependencies at this point, and we'll in a later brief, we'll talk about what's coming in that sense. I'm going to keep moving on, try to take some new questions. Let's see. When will Holoport Wonders join the network? In the sense that, will there be involvement of all, oh, I see. The Holoports that are sleeping before launch, or will the network at launch or in the following days? Okay, so Alistair, why don't you talk a little bit about the Holoports that will be coming on board?
So yeah, so I mean, the beautiful thing with peer-to-peer system is that it does depend on mutuality. At Holo, what we can do is, lay the groundwork, provide the platform, provide a call to action, but it's ultimately up to the individual Holoport owners as to whether they want to participate in the network right now. That said, right now we have what, 600-700 Holoports turned on, maybe more. I haven't taken a look recently, and that's before we've launched.
Great. Well, let's yeah, and we can't know really when people will turn on their Holoports. We're going to be sending a lot of information out to people and reminding people about the launch. We haven't really started any email campaigns yet, but that's something that will happen as we get closer. So let's see. What is the current situation with the data won't fetch bug? I don't know. Alistair, do you know what that is?
So data won't fetch bug. I assume that this is one of the Holoport or the host console related bugs. It's essentially like a timeout bug, so there's many underlying causes, but the most prevalent one is that when we released our network, the network release candidate, one of the things that we discovered was there were certain bottlenecks in the networking infrastructure of Holochain, which is a good thing to find before launch. So we're glad that we released then and found that out. So that's actually one of the reasons why we're upgrading to 0.4, because it does contain optimizations and improvements that does fix that.
Great, thanks. All right, I'm just going to move through some of these quickly. How can you launch Holo in a month or so with no production-ready apps to get hosted? Maybe just Snore. Well, I just want to say something. The production-ready apps that are ready is the Holo network. So part of what it means to get the Holo network launched is getting a broad-based network generally available. And that's a super important accomplishment, because then people will know that there is a way, a place to be able to host those applications. In a way, it is the proof that Holochain's ready, that Holo is ready, that people can build on all of this. So some folks have been building along this path over the course of years even. But right now, there are a lot of people that maybe are waiting for this signal, in the same way that a lot of other networks had to go live, and then people started bringing applications to the network. So I think this is a normal course of business for us. We do expect that there will be a ramp up over time. It's not something that you go live and boom, everything's there. Every business has its growth time frame, and we'll have ours. So the next one is, can Holoport owners not yet in alpha be assured that they will have a chance to recoup their investment after supporting the project? Well, everybody will have a chance to join the network and work as a host on the network. And in fact, that is, there's not, you don't have to be in the alpha network to be on the Holo network at launch. So the Holo network at launch is going to be the opportunity for people to do that. When do we expect 100K agents? I don't have an answer for that. So for one thing, Holochain is really distributed, right? So when you talk about an agent, you're talking about a node. You can talk about nodes on the Holo network, and that might be what the question being asked is, but you can also ask about nodes on all of the other applications. So there have been a lot of progress. There's been a ton of progress lately on applications running on mobile, Holochain applications running on mobile. There's been a lot of progress on, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the work that's been coming out of Lightning Rod Labs having to do with Moss and the weave. This is tons of different functional applets running inside of a shared group context. So it's like groupware. There's no way for us to know how many nodes are running at any given time in all of those contexts. And even when applications get hosted, you can consider it that part of the network will be hosted and part of the network will be local, and there will never be a way for us to, as a centralized entity, to know the full kind of number of agents or nodes in every application created. So we will have information on, and we will have basically Grafana, help me out, Alistair. Sorry, I've got a word missing. We're going to be having dashboards that tell us what's going on the Holo network, but it's not necessarily going to tell us everything about what's going on in all of the applications. Do you want to say a little bit about the dashboards?
I mean, only that they're really geared towards understanding the platform health itself rather than users, because those users aren't Holo users, they are customers' users. So,
Right.
yeah, as a privacy conscious organization, we definitely don't want to be collecting data where we don't necessarily need it.
Yep. All right, great. All right, so let's keep going. Curious if Holo will still be a form of centralization where anyone that wants to exchange fuel for fiat needs to be an active host and needs to go through the Holo team's reserves. Well, we're not at the point where we have fiat reserves, but anybody going through the reserve account in the near future, or the future that we can see right now, would need to go through some sort of KYC basically to do that. In the future, a lot of things are possible. We don't know what will change in terms of the architecture, how other organizations will, or other distributed platforms or technologies will kind of come and work alongside. And we really can't predict that at this time. So has there been any discussion of making sure there are hardening guides? None are on the dev portal CIS benchmarks. That's actually not something that I think we can really take in the Holo update. So more that's better for the dev portal or the Discord channel would be a good question for the Discord channel, I think. Is there any region in the world where the Holoport won't work, or can it be plugged in anywhere? That's a great question. These things change from time to time. We know that there have been issues in certain jurisdictions in the past, and I don't know that we've been digging in the last couple of months to test any of this. Are you familiar with this, Alistair?
off the top of my head, the main one is China, and that wasn't to do with Holochain, or really our core infrastructure. It was more that some of the basic, NixOS caches and so on, of which Holoports essentially run NixOS, didn't well, didn't have a mirror in China.
Got it. So at a technical level, you're saying that software that was a dependency couldn't be downloaded into China such that the Holoport could become functional and update itself.
Yeah, and that wasn't even like a hard technical issue. I think just no one was bothering to pay for and maintain servers to provide that.
Got it. I'm sure we're going to hit different issues on this, and we'll have a lot of more information about that probably during the launch process and post-launch, and that will be available on the help site. Okay, great. Can you explain the current server issues facing the Holoports updated to the release candidate? What's the current situation and the way forward? Alistair, do you want to take this? I don't really know what the current issues are.
That's essentially this, I think, the same or a similar question to the one earlier about the data, about getting the data. So
Okay.
it essentially, Holochain networking relies on certain relay nodes, to support networking, because not every node has a public IP, and those nodes were getting overloaded because of the way they were architected. So again, this is something that
Got it.
0.4 is supposed to solve.
Right. So what this is about is that Holochain made some changes between 0.2 and 0.4 about how it was doing the internal networking for Holochain applications themselves. The nodes themselves are communicating like Holochain applications. So not only do we have the layer of network that basically is more like the internet layer with the IP, the way Alistair was talking about, but on top of that, we have the Holochain networking that's happening between the nodes themselves to coordinate as well. Okay. When will the one-on-one change to Holofuel begin? That'll happen after launch. What will the support function process be during launch? Things like help desk, bug resolution, system report recovery. So right now we have a Holochain forum, and a lot of information happens there. There's a lot of peer-to-peer conversation on the Holochain forum, as well as our team is constantly updating and giving sort of hosts the things that they need to know on the Holochain forum. On top of that, we have a help desk, help.holo.host, where people can open tickets and have them be held for things that are taking a little bit longer, that need any escalation, or further technical support. Okay. I think we're getting to the end of our time. So yeah, there's a few other questions there. We're going to pass them on to the next brief. Basically, we'll talk about those later, and we're also going to be having an AMA, I believe, next week. I'm not sure what the date of that is, but it is definitely coming soon. And so there'll be lots of places that you can ask more questions. Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure. Talk soon. Thanks, Alistair.
Thank you.